What is up, my Squirtleites? It is I, your king, welcoming you to the May 2023 edition of Let's Talk. This month, first half of the video is going to be the standard update fare, going over all of the current series, all of the upcoming series. I've got dates for multiple things. This is probably the most, set plan that I've had since the beginning of the year as far as all of this stuff is concerned. So lots to go over in that regard. It's going to take up the first half of the episode. Back half is going to be discussing The Last of Us show, which is something I promised that I would be doing last month after we went over the Super Mario Brothers movie. I figured, hey, let's just start going over video game properties, movies and TV shows and whatnot. Mario Brothers was the most topical last month, so this time around it's The Last of Us show, which isn't the most topical, but I was already kind of behind and had missed the boat on it anyway at that point, so hey, what was one more month? Not to mention it is an entire TV show, or at least an entire season of a TV show, which means that there is a lot more to discuss. I am not going to be spoiling things within the TV show itself. I am more so going to be spoiling things in The Last of Us game and juxtaposing the events and the storytelling format of the game to the way that the story was told within the show. And just kind of comparing the two and showing, talking about what the show did better, what the game did better, and so on and so forth. So we'll be going episode by episode in that regard. And again, I'm going to try to keep the show portion as spoiler-free as possible, but there are going to be certain things about it that I'm not going to be able to avoid talking about to get certain points across. So I'm saying all of that with a warning. Just be aware if you don't want to know anything about the show at all whatsoever. Once I'm done with the update stuff, I'll let you all know. I'll let you know going into the Last of Us discussion, and then you can just turn the video off. So let's start by discussing the elephant in the room, which is obviously the lack of a Pokemon Let's Play at the moment. So obviously the very start, the whole original plan after Pokemon Legends Arceus was done was to jump into Let's Play Pokemon White. But I did say last month in the Let's Talk that I was probably going to miss the deadline for that one. With Legends Arceus ending at the end of April, the first episode of Pokemon White was originally supposed to be going up on May 1st. Obviously, that didn't happen. I went out on Twitter and said that I was shooting for 2 weeks after the fact, which was supposed to originally be May 15th, so the Monday of the week that you're getting this. And obviously didn't hit that either. I went out, tweeted again, said, okay, I'm going to try for one more week, which is now, as of right now, May 22nd. And currently, that is looking like what's going to happen. This whole entire endeavor, this whole entire Let's Play has been nothing short of a big frickin' hassle. I already talked about how back in 2021, I tried to record through the entire game. I didn't quite finish it, but I got pretty darn close, and then I realized that the method with which I was recording the entire thing just flat out wasn't working. So I decided I'm just going to wait a while, come back to it, give it another shot, and this time I'm going to try to make my DS capture card actually work this time as opposed to emulating it. I started recording the Let's Play again back in March, got through the entire game, all the way through the credits, into most of the post-game, was basically done. I really only had a couple of episodes left to do, but the reason I hadn't immediately jumped into those is because it required some grinding, which is something I needed to do off-camera anyway, so I was just like, all right, you know what? It's time to start editing these things. I sat down in the editing chair, got to work on it, and I realized, oh crap. The video footage was fine. It was actually perfect. It was the audio this time that had really screwed me over. So, for those who don't know, when you're using the DS capture card, well, the most common method of DS capture software requires a line-in input. This is an auxiliary cord to record the audio, and then no matter what you do, you have to just use any audio recording software of your choice to separately record that audio from the capture card software. The capture card software that the DS that is native to the DS capture board does not record the audio. It only records the video. So you need to have two things running parallel. The problem is that line-in input can be incredibly finicky and often is extremely low quality. And not to mention, with the DS itself and its sound chip, it causes this persistent buzzing noise in the background. Well, what I didn't know, and I didn't realize immediately, and this was not an issue that cropped up constantly, it was an issue that cropped up every once in a while and wasn't very easy for me to catch until I actually started editing the full episodes, was that the line-in audio was causing occasional peaks and gains that were going past the threshold that my audio software liked. And I wasn't constantly paying attention to the waveform because I was more focused on the waveform of my own voice when I'm recording commentary for these things rather than the waveform of the gameplay itself. And about every 5 to 6 minutes or so, and this would fluctuate up and down, sometimes it would peak to a point where the audio waveform it essentially just cut out all of the audio. Like you could hear a buzzing noise, but you couldn't hear the game, period, for several seconds, sometimes up to a minute. And when I finally sat down and started editing these videos, I realized that large swaths of every single episode had completely unusable audio. And this was not a problem, a thing that could be easily caught, because usually what I would do is I would sit down to make sure that this raw footage was usable. I would, after recording it, because they would come out in an AVI file, I would just put it into the media player and watch it for a couple of minutes and see if anything was good. And not once was I ever able to catch this while watching like 2 or 3 minutes, just to make sure there was no desync. Sometimes I would click around in the video as well, just to in random areas, just to see if there was any desync or any issues. And from everything that I saw, it looked fine. Once I got into the editing software, it was no longer fine, and it was not the editing software itself, it was the actual files. Like, once I went back into the media player and played like a full episode all the way through, I realized, oh no, this issue is native to the file itself. I'm in trouble. So, I have basically had to make the decision to just start from scratch again, and I had to go with a different method. So I had to come to a compromise where I used an emulator, but instead of capturing it with screen capture, I captured it through an actual proper capture card this time. And so far, at least as far as I can tell, and I sat down and watched through multiple episodes this time of like raw footage, I've seen no issues. And while I haven't actually gotten to sit down and edit this series yet, I'm going to be doing that this weekend. It all seems good. But the fact that I have had to record now Pokemon White in its entirety twice in a matter of just a couple of months, I am exhausted. I mean, I love these games, don't get me wrong. I mean, were this any other game in the entire series, I probably would have just said screw it and not even given this a second shot for some time. But the fact that I love Pokemon White so much was enough for me to be willing to tolerate looking at this entire game all over again. It was exhausting. I mean, I love these games, but going through 2 RPGs in, 8 weeks is ridiculous, no matter what RPG that is. And this time around, I recorded all the way up until the credits hit, and then I stopped. So I have not recorded the post-game yet, and I do not intend to for some time, because I have decided I am going to be coming to a compromise. Pokemon White is going to be uploaded all the way through to the completion of the main story. Once the credits roll, it's going to take a pause. After that, we're going to start Pokepark 2. I feel bad for the people who are anticipating it after seeing the Pokepark 1 series. I want to give people a chance of actually seeing that at some time this year. So after the main story is done, Pokepark 2 will happen. I'm going to look at it to the very same extent that I looked at the first Pokepark, where I tried to do as much as was possible within the main game while not necessarily giving it a total completionist run and avoiding most of the post-game stuff, at least for the time being. So we're going to go through all of Pokemon White, credits roll, then Pokepark 2, all the way through it, through the main story, credits roll, then back to Pokemon White to look at all of the post-game stuff. That is obviously, just those 2 games alone. It's going to take more than the rest of the year. It's going to go well into 2024, and then we will go from there. Now, for anybody concerned about Pokemon White 2, the sequel, and where that's going to land in all of this, I am going to be doing the very cliche thing of waiting 2 years to the date after the start of Pokemon White before I start the sequel. So that would, as of right now, if I'm going to be as optimistic as possible, that would be May 22nd of 2025 when you guys see the sequel. And I have a lot of Pokemon games lined up for the intermittent space between the two, lots of spin-offs to look at and whatnot, so don't fret in that regard. It's not like I'm going to run out of Pokemon content, but yeah, I do want to give the sequel a little while after the conclusion of this game. All right, that's enough of Pokemon. Let's do the obligatory Horizon Forbidden West roundup. It's still going. It's the Energizer Bunny of Let's Plays at this point. It just continues and continues, and it keeps going and going and going. As for all of the post-game content and the Burning Shores, I still have not had a chance to even look Burning Shores way, even on my own time since the expansion came out. It's a huge bummer. I really wish I could make time and actually sit down and play it, but I have just been so overloaded and so busy lately that it has just not been feasible to do. I'm hoping to maybe sit down with the game next week and finally actually look at it, because I fully intend to play through the entirety of the expansion on my own time before I actually sit down and start recording it this time around. That said, I've said multiple times about how far I'm in Horizon Forbidden West. I am done with the game as far as recording is concerned. The main game is done. The credits have rolled. And that's it. I left some stuff for the post-game, namely the Machine Strike boards, most of the Machine Strike games, a lot of the arena, basically 2/3 of all of the arena challenges, all of the gauntlet runs. I didn't even look at that once during the course of the Let's Play. And then a couple more melee pits, which have all been saved for the end of the game. Now, I was originally going to be looking at all of that before we got into Burning Shores, but with how long and how tedious some of those things can be, I'm kind of pulling back on that promise a little bit. I do fully intend to look at the last couple of melee pits, for sure. I mean, we've already looked at all of the ones leading up to this point, so might as well look at the rest of them in the Let's Play. I do intend to look at least a chunk of the remaining arena challenges, but probably not all of them. What I do not intend to do all of is the gauntlet runs and the Machine Strike boards, because Machine Strike, for, as variably enjoyable as it can be from person to person, I do not want to sit there and subject you guys to watching me play through every single Machine Strike board in the game. I'm probably just going to show a couple more, maybe some of like the hardest ones if possible, just to kind of show that off. But aside from that, I make no more promises to spend too much more time on Machine Strike. The gauntlet runs are going to pretty much be the same thing, but obviously I do need to show them to some extent because we haven't looked at them within the Let's Play, but I will not be showing every single gauntlet run, especially because that is the most infuriating side content in all of Horizon Forbidden West, and I do not want to tear my hair out trying to get a live recording of me getting the most successful runs or a successful run done of the most challenging gauntlet runs in the game. It's just not worth it. It already makes me lose my sanity even when I'm not trying to also commentate while I do those gauntlet runs. But I'll try to keep the post-game stuff a bit more minimal than I was originally intending. Hopefully like maybe 3 or 4 more episodes, maybe 5, before we jump on into Burning Shores after the fact. But yeah, that series is still just going and going. I just haven't had any time to record or even look at the post-game and obviously expansion stuff yet. So eventually I will get around to it. That is, as far as my order of operations go, because I do have an order, I said earlier in the year that I wanted to make a point of really focusing on a game once I start recording it. Like, I don't want to jump around as much anymore when looking at certain games. If I am starting a Let's Play, I don't want to move on to another game until that Let's Play is done, at least from a recording standpoint. And so far, it's actually been working really well. I feel like the content has been a lot better. It allows me to be more straight-laced with everything and, keep my head on straight and, know what I'm actually doing, not come back to a game after a long time of not recording it and just be completely dumbfounded. So it's been working so far, but as far as the order of operations are concerned, right now, coming back to Horizon Forbidden West is sitting at about 5th in the sequence of events. So it's probably not going to happen until July, but that's not really a big concern of me to me, because as of right now, I've got episodes recorded through into September. So now let's move on to the other 3 time slots. Yes, I said 3. I know right now only 2 of them are active, but it'll all make sense in due time. So NFL Street, that is going to be ending on June 13th. That is when the finale goes up. It is the 40th episode of the series. It is the end of the NFL Challenge, and that is it. I didn't spend any time wasting it on quick games or pickup games or any of that stuff. I briefly showed the All NFL Pickup, which is the rewards you get from completing the NFL Challenge, but that is the extent of that. It is really just the end of the NFL Challenge and nothing more. After that ends, we are going to be jumping into Mario Party 1 for the Nintendo 64, which I did record on native hardware. I was not about to show the emulated versions, whether on a PC emulator or on the Wii U or on Switch Online. Actually, I don't know if it was on Wii U, but I know it's on Switch Online, and I was not about to show that version. My main reason for doing that is because I don't like the way that emulated versions look for Nintendo 64 in particular when recording those, because emulators like to get rid of a lot of very crucial graphical elements that make Nintendo 64 games look the way they're supposed to look, like jagged edges and like fog and multiple things that are meant for CRTs to actually look proper. And a lot of those things are just taken away in emulated versions, like the fog completely goes away, exposing a lot of badly put together background elements and things in the distance that are just not supposed to look that way. It also reveals a lot of things like polygons and seams within character models and things along those lines that just look a lot uglier. I would rather just record on native hardware with an inferior capture card than show that. So we are going to do it on native hardware. Hopefully it looks serviceable enough with my S-Video capture card, and I really wish I was able to get a hold of something like a FrameMeister before I was able to record something like this, but those things are prohibitively expensive and definitely a hobbyist thing that I just cannot afford these days. I really wish I could, but it's just not a realistic thing. But Mario Party 1 is going to be going all the way until September 2nd. Now, as to what we actually do in that series, it is just a single 20-turn playthrough of each of the major default boards within the game. I'm talking the original 6, not including the one unlockable board and not including the other board that is very Bowser-themed that I think is only exclusive to the story mode itself. And the reason I did this is because I wanted to not just do every board, but I also wanted to play each and every playable character in the game. So we looked at Mario's Rainbow Castle, DK's Jungle Adventure, Peach's Birthday Cake, Yoshi's Tropical Island, Wario's Battle Canyon, and Luigi's Engine Room. And like I said, 20 turns apiece. So each board turned out to be about 4 episodes apiece. There was only one board that ended up being an exception, just because I ended up blasting through it a lot faster than the other boards for whatever reason. I mean, I think I kind of know why, because of the mechanics of that board, but the rest of them were all 4 episodes, and that lone exception was 3 episodes. So pretty succinct, pretty quick series. I had a lot of fun with it, even though I did get the absolute shit kicked out of me, because Mario Party is a masochistic game made by just evil people. It really, really is by far the most unforgiving Mario Party I have ever played, and I was honestly shocked at how many times it was willing to just be downright nasty to both myself and the CPU opponents. But it was a lot of fun, and I think it made for some pretty entertaining episodes, so if you're all looking forward to that. Now, for the other upload slot, currently occupied by Rime. Rime is a pretty short game and is not going to be going too much longer, as that is going to be ending on June 10th. Yes, before NFL Street, believe it or not, even though it started much, much later. Very short game, only took me a grand total of 13 episodes to complete. That includes the first episode, which was originally a Let's Have a Look At. And yeah, that one ends relatively soon. This is going to be followed up by 2 mystery indie games that I don't want to say too much about. After Rime ends on June 10th, this new one's going to start, and this is the continuation, under another game that is a continuation of something I looked at back in the Varieties series back in January, February, March. I obviously don't want to say too much because I don't want to narrow it down, but we'll be continuing that game as well. That is an even shorter game that is only going to amount to a total of like 10 episodes. So that is going to be ending on July 10th. And then after that, we got another mystery indie series. And this is actually a game that I originally attempted to look at years and years ago. And I think I only uploaded like 2 episodes before I realized, oh crap, this wasn't working for one reason or another. I really think it actually came down to like a technical error, and this is a game that had autosaves that didn't allow me to go back and like redo my saves, and I think it was just because I ran into this big technical issue. I just scrapped the entire thing and said, all right, we'll try again later. So this is later. This is one of my favorite indie games of all time. It's one that came back out in 2016, and I would like to get it out before summer ends because it is really fitting of the summer and just works with this time of year, so I'm going to make a point of getting that one out. That should be another short game, although I cannot give a definitive answer as to when that is going to end. It's just going to be right after the last mystery indie game. I don't know if you guys are keeping up at this point, but regardless, what you need to know is Rime, then mystery indie game 1, then mystery indie game 2. And we'll talk about what comes after that in a second. But the last upload slot is, of course, Pikmin, which I mentioned last month was giving me a little bit of issues. I have since decided that I am just going to give it the old college try. I am just going to take everything at face value, and as I come across certain game-breaking bugs, I'm just going to deal with it. We're just going to play through the game. I'm going to be as transparent as possible. If I lose dozens and dozens of Pikmin to horrible glitches, I'm just going to have to take it on the cheek and continue. So that series is going to be starting at the tail end of June, and there's a good reason why I want to start it that late, but and also just because, you know, I need to re-record the entire thing again, so in due time, but that is coming, and that is going to be going in the originally intended upload slot, which is on Sunday and Wednesday evenings, which was originally No Man's Sky's upload slot. So, with Pikmin in mind, with Rime and the 2 mystery indie games in mind, with NFL Street and Mario Party in mind, when all of these series end is going to determine when Animal Crossing and Shadow of the Tomb Raider get started. Now, I don't know exactly when all of these are going to end. Only Mario Party is set in stone as ending on September 2nd. But whenever all of these series ends, Pikmin, the second mystery indie series, and Mario Party, whichever one of these 3 ends first, that is the series that is going to be followed by Animal Crossing. Whichever one of those ends second, that is the one that is going to be followed by Shadow of the Tomb Raider. That's really all I can say about the scheduling beyond anything else. I'm not even going to say which Animal Crossing game it is yet. I have made my decision at this point, because I was, torn between whether I wanted to do City Folk or New Horizons. I've come to the conclusion that which one's going to work the best. I don't want to say too much about it, but I hope you guys are looking forward to that. I'm going to get started on that one relatively soon. Going back to my order of operations, that one is actually third, so I'm going to be recording Shadow of the Tomb Raider next, then Pikmin, then Animal Crossing, and then finally after that, Burning Shores. It's not about when the series end or how long the series are. It's all about when they start. And so I just got to get ahead on things, but and I know it sounds all really confusing and whatnot, but it'll all make sense once everything sort of starts to fall into place. But the main point that I'm trying to make here is that all those games I just mentioned, NFL Street, Mario Party, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Rime, 2 mystery indie games, Animal Crossing, Pikmin, these are going to make up the bulk of summer and beyond. That's pretty much it. That's really all you need to know about that, because Pokemon White and Horizon Forbidden West, they ain't going anywhere anytime soon. Now, I also have hinted at multiple times over the past couple of Let's Talks that I wanted to make some tier list videos. Right now, the plan is to upload those every single Sunday for the first 3 weeks of June. So, first Sunday of June, second Sunday of June, third Sunday of June, I'm going to have a tier list video up each and every single one of those days in the evening slot before Pikmin happens. That is why Pikmin is going to be at the tail end of June. These are just going to be trial runs. I've got 3 different topics that I'm going to be doing these tier lists for. I hope they generate discussion. I hope people like them. They're going to be just kind of a try. It's just going to be something to do, I suppose. I just want to throw it out there, see if it sticks. If it doesn't, I won't make any more. If it does stick, well, I would like to make more of these in the future, and maybe I can get some suggestions on things we can go over. Again, these are just to kind of generate discussion and have conversation about certain things while also just kind of going over various things in those categories. But that's pretty much everything as far as future uploads are concerned, or at least everything that you guys need to know. I do have a video planned in the next week or so that is probably going to be a little bit contentious, but it is something that has really been on my mind as of late, and I think it all kind of came to a head with the release of Tears of the Kingdom. Now, I want to start by saying that I have not played Tears of the Kingdom. I have absolutely no opinions on Tears of the Kingdom. But Tears of the Kingdom coming out kind of sparked a debate that seems to come up every single time a super beloved video game comes out that I'm really sick and tired of seeing. So I have decided to make a video, and I've already written the entire script out. In fact, I'm going to be recording it as soon as I'm done with this, assuming I still have the voice for it. Going over the merits and the whole entire point of reviews. It's going to be sort of an op-ed piece. And I make these every once in a while, mainly because of, well, I don't really see these things very often anymore. There was, and you know, God rest his soul, I really do miss Total Biscuit, because he was very good at just kind of putting out op-eds and generating a discussion and having a very measured approach when talking about these sorts of things, and we just do not have enough of that on YouTube nowadays, because everything has to be reactionary. Everything has to be that first hot take. We have to just immediately jump to the defense or to the attack of something or somebody at every single turn, and just be progressively more angry about it. And while I am absolutely making this video with righteous indignation in mind, I do want to take a measured approach to it, because I have a lot to say on this topic, because I feel like the well has been truly poisoned in regards to the debate surrounding what the heck reviews even are. And so I have a video in mind for that. It's not going to be anything super fancy editing-wise. It's more so just going to be a discussion with kind of just more gameplay in the background, not too dissimilar from these Let's Talks. Honestly, it would have been tacked onto this video in the place of the Last of Us review had I not already promised that I was going to do that. But trying to include all of those things in this Let's Talk would have made this whole video run like 2 hours long. I mean, I guess if I really wanted to go the full podcast route, that would be doable, but no, I decided it would just make a lot more sense to split them up. And here in the next week or so, hopefully you guys will get a video just talking about reviews, and we can have that discussion, because I do think that this is a very important conversation to have, and hopefully it actually reaches some people that are in need of that discussion, because, wow, there are some people with incredibly toxic opinions about reviews. It's not about Tears of the Kingdom in and of itself. It's more about the discussion that was sparked by it, but it's also not Tears of the Kingdom entirely. It also goes over Redfall and actually the Super Mario Brothers movie and multiple things. These things in tandem kind of all combined to birth the discussion that we're going to be having in that video. So it just sort of all came to a head in the last couple of weeks, and I feel very strongly about this topic, so I do want to make a video on it here relatively soon, so look forward to that. All right, it's time. Let's move on. Let's talk The Last of Us. I don't really have anything else regarding the channel left to talk about, so if you are worried about spoilers for The Last of Us TV show, or even the game if you haven't played it up to this point, you can click off now. But if you have already played these things, if you don't care about spoilers, if you've played the game, if you've watched the show or any of those sorts of things, stick around. We're going to go over these things. I'm going to be going episode by episode while trying not to spoil things that necessarily happen within the episodes, but some of it is going to be inevitable, because there are obviously things within the show that is copied one-to-one from the game, so it's kind of hard not to spoil those things. So I want to start off first and foremost by saying that I really enjoyed this show. I really enjoyed this first season and the way that it was able to adapt the games. What I think made it so special was the fact that while, yes, it does, for the most part, use the exact same story as the games, they did so in such a way that allows the story of the game and the story of the show to coexist without stepping on each other's toes. And that is a really hard thing to do, and honestly not the route I thought they were going to take. I really genuinely figured that they figured the story of The Last of Us was so strong that they could just one-to-one adapt it and it would work perfectly as is. They would just turn the game's cutscenes into a show, and that would be enough. And honestly, I feel like they almost could have gotten away with that, you know, with the right directing and the right acting and whatnot. But that's not actually what happened this time. So to start things off, I should probably preface by saying I am a huge fan of The Last of Us, the first Last of Us as a game. I love that game a lot. I know not everybody is a huge fan of it. I know not everybody likes the decisions it took and its approach to storytelling. They also don't like the influence that it's had on storytelling in modern games, how a lot of them love to take control away from the player. A lot more people prefer to have their video games stories told through gameplay, which The Last of Us does not necessarily do all the time. It does sometimes, but it also does like to wrestle control away and just sort of show these vignettes and have these cutscenes. And I think the only reason I enjoyed it so much in The Last of Us was just due to how well the characters are portrayed. Naughty Dog in general, they're just really, really good at portraying characters that you instantly love. Like, even Uncharted did a very, very good job of this. And in fact, The Last of Us, as far as Naughty Dog games are concerned, is my second favorite behind only Uncharted 2. And both of those do a very good job of framing and portraying characters in a certain light that make them incredibly exciting. Obviously with completely different tones and whatnot, but that's what I appreciate about those games above any other games that try to dedicate most of their storytelling time to cutscenes. Most of them just cannot pull it off the way that these games do, and I feel like that's why it works. I'm not as big of a fan of The Last of Us Part 2, but that's kind of unrelated, but I do want to kind of preface and say that that's the case, and it's not really due to a lot of the reasons a lot of other people don't like Last of Us 2. I didn't have a problem with the storytelling, the story itself. I didn't have a lot of problems with, I actually thought the gameplay was even better than the first game. There's a lot of things to love about it. I just didn't like the tone. I felt like it was a bit too depressing and a bit too dark for my liking, and not even in like a morbidly interesting way. It was more of just this makes me miserable and sad and I don't want this anymore kind of way. Wasn't really a fan of the way of what the story was. It just kind of, I don't know, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way from start to finish. Not saying that it was actually necessarily a bad plot, it just wasn't for me. But love The Last of Us 1, so I did have a reasonable set of expectations when coming into the show, because I figured this is a very easy thing to adapt, but if they can't get this right, what hope is there for any other video game properties? And going into the first episode, I was a little bit nervous. Now, this first episode is the longest episode, or I actually think it was the second longest episode in the entire series. I think it was actually a bit shorter than the third episode, which we'll be getting into later, but the first episode is much of the opening hour and a half of the game. It is the whole opening section with Joel and his daughter, and the beginning is with the outbreak and the tragedy that ensues and how the world just descends into chaos. And then after the fact, with the 20 years later, 25 years later, whatever, moving into the future with old, seasoned, grumpy, angry Joel and his partner Tess and the things that they're doing, and all the way up to even meeting Ellie. Now, my absolute favorite thing about this episode is the production design. When the world descends into chaos and everybody's running for their lives, you get a sense that everything in that scene, outside of maybe a couple of explosions, is legit. They're all extras in the background. The production design, just in general with this show, is fantastic, but this episode probably showcases that the best, in my opinion. Unfortunately, that was probably my favorite part of the entire episode, because the rest of it felt like it was trying too hard to be like the games, and it was a bit ham-fisted. Now, that's not to say there weren't good moments. In fact, some of the characters we never see again made for the strongest parts. Joel's neighbors, who we actually get to see a little bit of, were really, really interesting. The girl that plays Joel's daughter, Sarah, was awesome. She was fantastic in this. In fact, it was Joel that actually had me the most worried after this first episode. Well, not the most, but I'll get into that in a second. I love Pedro Pascal. I think he's a phenomenal actor. Don't get me wrong. He's awesome in Game of Thrones. He's awesome in Narcos. He's, he's great as the Mandalorian, as great as he could be, but I don't think he himself is a problem. I was just a little bit worried about the nature of how they were directing him. He didn't feel like, at first, that he could fit the type of character that Joel was supposed to be. He didn't seem as gruff, as seasoned, as much of a big macho man or whatever as Joel is supposed to be, and therefore it didn't feel like he fit the role just yet after watching this episode. So I was a bit worried about him, but don't worry, those fears were unfounded. When we get the flash forward, though, this was probably one of my least favorite parts of the whole show. And that was unfortunately Tess. Okay, I'm actually interjecting myself here, talking about this in particular, because I feel like I didn't really clarify my point well enough by just saying that Tess seemed old. That's not very fair. It's just more the makeup and the situation that she was in that kind of attributed to that look. What I meant to say more so, and this is really well illustrated by an omission of a scene from the first episode that was from the beginning of the game, where Tess and Joel hunt down a man named Robert, who does them dirty on a deal, basically sells their stock off to the Fireflies when he had no right to do it, so they hunt him down and they kill him, showing how ruthless they are as bounty hunters. We don't get this scene in the first episode because when they find Robert, he's just already dead. And now this was a really effective scene for showing how ruthless Tess is as a killer, that she is every bit as capable as Joel. And, it makes her ultimate sacrifice all the more impactful because it makes you think that it just as well could have been Joel as it was her when that inevitably happens. So I think that was my biggest complaint. The acting itself was phenomenal from Anna Torv. Don't get me wrong. I just wasn't a huge fan of what they did with Tess's character because I felt like the original was so strong that losing out on that was... it wasn't my favorite. Let's just put it that way. I'm jumping the gun a little bit because, the first episode is really just when they meet Ellie. And they do things a bit differently in the show where they actually give us a bit of a prelude to Ellie. You see that she's being actually held hostage by the Fireflies in the show before, they're interrogating her and they're trying to figure out what the heck is going on with her and the fact that she's infected, and that's why they're not letting her go because they know she's infected, but they're trying to determine and make sure that she is still cognizant and aware and that, and determine that she's immune, essentially. While in the game, the first time we meet Ellie is the first time Joel and Tess meet Ellie. Like, it's the second they walk through the door and Marlene is keeping them in the dark about what's going on. She's just immediately there, and she's not being held hostage. She's actually being kept secret, and she is willingly with the Fireflies, which is a bit of a different take, but whatever. It all makes sense, though, in the context of the story and the events that happen in the show a little bit later on. So that was different and interesting. We got to see how Bella Ramsey was portraying the character, and I think they were doing a very good job right off of the bat. I was immediately like, okay, I like this actress that they picked for Ellie. I think they're doing a fine job already, but a different portrayal. I want to stress that right now. While they are being written similarly to Joel and Ellie from the games, they are not the same Joel and Ellie. This might as well be like a parallel universe Joel and Ellie, where it's generally the same vibe, but not the same character, and you can tell based on just the way that they're performing as these characters. Then we get into the second episode, which was my least favorite episode in the entire show. And this was Joel and Ellie leaving the quarantine zone, and Tess leaving the quarantine zone, heading out into the outskirts. They're supposed to go meet with the Fireflies further beyond. In the game, they're getting to like a Capitol building or whatever. I can't remember where they go in the show exactly. But they have Fedra agents on their trail. They decided to scrap and nix that part. Once they were out of the quarantine zone, they had no more Fedra agents to worry about. Wasn't even an issue anymore in the show. It was mostly just the infected. And this is where we get a bit more of an in-depth explanation into how the infected work. This is when the show first shows the iconic clickers. And we get a scene with those, an action scene and all that sort of stuff. And then we also lose Tess, who obviously, what happens in the game is, they're cornered by Fedra agents. She holds them off long enough for Joel and Ellie to make their escape because she has already been bitten as infected in the moment that happens in the museum with the clickers. In the show, she's already infected, but instead she lets herself be overrun by infected, and she makes this big grand sacrifice to kind of blow up all the infected, and I just found it a little bit too ham-fisted and cheesy. Like I said, I just didn't like what they did with the Tess character. I was a bit bummed by this. I mean, don't get me wrong, the way she went out was cool, but it also felt really cliched, and wasn't a fan of that. This was also a pretty short episode. Really, the two strongest moments of this episode was a moment where Tess kind of sits down and explains to Ellie how the infected work. I think that was the most interesting part of this entire episode. And then the whole action scene with the clickers wasn't too bad. It was pretty cool. But that aside, I was pretty on all this. Oh, actually, wait. There was one other good scene. There's an opening scene where they, Tess and Joel finally realize that Ellie's infected, and they're, wary and cautious of her and blah, blah, blah. And I love the sass from Ellie's character in that scene. That was like the moment where you're like, okay, I know I'm going to like Ellie for the remainder of the show, was that little moment there. So that was a good part too. But it was otherwise kind of a slower plotting episode, didn't have a whole lot going on, a lot of just kind of looking at the ruins, mostly just set dressing, which, that in and of itself can be interesting. But I don't know, I just wasn't as taken by this one. But then we get into the third episode, and this is, of course, if you've heard anything about the show, you've probably heard about this third episode. This is the episode featuring Bill. And Bill is played by Nick Offerman, who is just a phenomenal actor. And then we see Frank, who is played by Murray Bartlett, who is also a phenomenal actor. This is the episode that, without a doubt, deviates from the game the most, because in the games, Ellie and Joel go to Bill for supplies. They end up having to fight their way through the city, trying to get a hold of a truck so that they can actually drive across the country to get to where they need to go a lot faster, because instead of going, across the city, now they're having to go all the way out frickin' west to run into Joel's brother Tommy, who knows how far out west. So they've got to cross state lines, and so they need a truck, and Bill is supposed to help them with all of that. Well, I mean, technically that happens in this episode, but that is pretty much the extent of what I can say about this one, because this episode is much less Joel and Ellie's story and more Bill and Frank's story. And it, in and of itself, might be one of the greatest episodes of television I have ever seen. It is extremely heartwarming. It is extremely thought-provoking. It, in and of itself, could be like a self-contained film. There is a scene at the very beginning and a scene at the very end of the episodes that kind of bookend it, that do feature Joel and Ellie. If you were to cut those scenes out, independent of the show, and just take all that out and then just leave the rest in, I could watch that over and over again. That's how freaking good it was. This was the moment that I was like, okay, this show is about to be something really, really special, because one of the prevailing themes of The Last of Us as a whole is, yes, zombies are in it. Yes, there are horrible people in it, but the prevailing theme of The Last of Us as a game and, as a story in general was, even in the darkest moments of humanity, there is beauty that shines through. And nothing hammers that message home better than this third episode. I'm telling you right now, if you only watch that episode, you're probably set. It is that freaking good. Everybody lauded it and praised it. Of course, some people were idiots and decided to lambaste it and say that it was horrible and all that stuff, but those people are bigots. Those people aside, this was amazingly put together. Like, Nick Offerman deserves the frickin' Emmy just on this alone. Not that I give a shit about the Emmys, but he was fantastic, because he actually did a lot less of the talking in this episode. That was actually more put on Murray Bartlett in this one. It was he was actually supposed to do a lot more of the emotional expressions and whatnot as Bill, as a character. A man of few words in comparison to Frank, who is much more of a talky character. And while they both did great, Nick Offerman in particular just blew me away in this one. And it is just a fantastic episode. This is really where the show peaked. But it's not the only superb episode. I want to say that right off the bat. Very good, but not the only superb one. Just the best one, unfortunately. Fortunately and unfortunately. Very fantastic. And yeah, I was a huge fan of this one. Absolutely emotional and all that. I mean, what more can I say? It was so good. And completely deviated from the game, and I was okay with that. With the way that they actually handled it, totally fine. And this is actually the moment where I started to realize that they really were trying to pull away from the game story and make this sort of this alternate telling of the same show. They don't want to replace the Last of Us game's story, which I appreciate, because it doesn't need to do that. This is its own thing. It is more or less the same plot, but told in a very different manner with similar characters, more or less getting the same message across. And you know what? That is fine. That is absolutely fine. After the whole Bill and Frank stuff, obviously Joel and Ellie are then supposed to land in, I think it was Chicago or something like that, but I don't think it's the same city. I think they said it was a different city in the show. I can't remember what city exactly, but somewhere out in the Midwest. they land in Chicago, and this is a place where hunters are at. Hunters are basically gang members and guys that basically just kill people to loot their stuff. That is how they get their food. That is how they just rob and kill people to take all of their things. And Joel and Ellie are caught in a trap by these guys, and they have to fight their way through the city and get out of there safely after their truck is sabotaged and make their way through. And on the way, they run into two characters, Henry and Sam. Henry is more or less, he's like a young adult. He's like in his early 20s, mid 20s or something along those lines. Very capable guy who's able to fight his way through, but he is taking care of Sam, who is about the same age as Ellie. In the show, it's a bit of a different situation. So instead of dealing with quote-unquote hunters, it's actually the civilians of the city that have just risen up and killed all of the Fedra agents in the city. And Fedra is constantly said to be very oppressive. They're basically a big police state fascist regime that is, they're holding everyone under martial law, quote unquote, for their own safety, trying to maintain order. But with all that power gone to their heads, some Fedra agents are more oppressive than others, and these people were really dealt a bad deal by the Fedra agents there, so they are not happy, and the rebellious people are incredibly violent, and they have a leader who is named Kathleen, and she is pretty pissed at Henry, who, she is basically on a manhunt for Henry, trying to hunt him down for one reason or another. And Henry and Sam actually don't meet up with Joel and Ellie at all within this episode. Not until the very, very end of the episode. They don't even see each other. They are kind of in their own separate places. But a really cool change that they made in this particular episode, with this particular plot line, is that Sam, one, is actually a lot younger than Ellie. He's only like 7 or 8 years old this time around, as opposed to being a teenager like Ellie. And two, he's deaf. And not only is he deaf, he's actually played by a proper deaf actor. And I thought immediately, like, is this really going to add anything to the story? And oh, yes, it did. Oh, my goodness. Not just in the storytelling, but the cinematography, the sound design, the way that they were able to incorporate his disability with how him and Henry carry themselves, and also changing a bit of Henry's character and whatnot. And this fourth episode, it's mostly Joel and Ellie kind of being on the run, and then we get mentions of Henry. We get to see Henry, but we never see how he interacts with Kathleen. We don't know anything about that plot line. We just know that she's trying to hunt him down. And we see a lot about, Kathleen's regime and what they're trying to do and how they're trying to basically rule and govern themselves while also dealing with any dissenters. And Joel and Ellie kind of get caught in the middle of this, and they have to defend themselves, much like they did in the game and all that sort of stuff. But, this is also the moment where Joel teaches Ellie essentially how to kill because she has to for her own survival. This was a moment that happened at relatively the same time in the game, but it was under a bit of different circumstances, more or less. Very well done. I really liked this episode. I think the only thing I didn't like in this episode was I wasn't a big fan of Kathleen at first, but she did grow on me. And by the next episode, actually, I thought she was doing a very good job. But it was the stuff with Henry and Sam that really had me glued to the screen in this particular episode. The fifth episode is when they team up, when Henry and Sam team up with Joel and Ellie, and the four of them are trying to escape together to get out of Kathleen's clutches. This episode was phenomenal because this follows all the way through to the very end of the Henry and Sam plotline. If you know what goes on in the games, I'm obviously not going to talk about it too much, but the way that the show did it was just, oh my gosh. Like, probably the second strongest part of the entire show for me. There is a big climactic scene with what happens between the hunters and Kathleen and, or her people and Kathleen, and then obviously Joel, Ellie, Henry, and Sam, and then that whole situation. That is a good scene, but it is not the strongest scene of the entire episode. In the game, there's like this big like sniper shootout or whatever where, they're all trying, they have a sniper, and Joel has to like sneak his way up to a house and take out the sniper, and then he has to use that same sniper nest to like defend everybody from first the hunters and their stupid machine gun truck or whatever, and then after that some infected and whatnot, and this obviously leads to finding out that Sam got bit, okay? And so after that happens, we then get this little scene where they all think they're gonna go together, and Sam has this little conversation with Ellie that he's a little bit afraid that he's just afraid. What happens when somebody gets bit? Do you know if it's bad or whatever? And, Ellie tries to reassure him or whatever. But Sam hides the fact that he's bit. Nobody knows that he's actually been bit. And then, of course, the next morning, he's infected. And then a whole series of events happens after the fact. The show does it a bit differently. And again, I don't want to say how it does this scene, because you probably should just watch it for yourself. But my goodness, is it effective. And again, some of just stellar acting from Bella Ramsey in this part. And actually, even, the actors who played Henry and Sam, like the two they picked for Henry and Sam really stuck out to me. These two were so freaking good. That kid that they got to play Sam was just incredible. Absolutely incredible, because he's deaf, which means that he also isn't speaking, which means that he's having to basically do all of his acting through micro expressions, which is just, most seasoned adult actors cannot pull that off. This kid does so freaking good. Like, I was seriously just awestruck by the talent on display here from a freaking kid. Most kid actors are just there because they're cute. Most kid actors can't actually act. Like, they can act a little bit, but they're usually pretty annoying. This kid just, oh my goodness, he was absolutely phenomenal in this role, and it made it all the more heartbreaking in the end. I was so shocked about how this was done, and what another effective episode. So well done. And again, the way that it deviated from the game was good. It was so freaking good. Then we get on to Joel's reunion with his brother Tommy, which was, again, handled a little bit different. In the games, they're going by this hydroelectric dam or whatever, and it just so happens that Tommy and his wife are there, and they're like restoring the dam so they can get power to their city or whatever. That's not how it works here. In the show, Joel and Ellie get cornered by some people who think they're a threat. They prove themselves not to be a threat, and then it turns out that they are the people that are in the town that Tommy is currently in. And we just go straight into the town in the show. We entirely avoid it within the first game. You actually don't even see the inside of Tommy's home until the second game, as a matter of fact. In the first game, it's entirely just, you see it from the outside, and that's the most you see of it. And here in the show, we actually get to see the inner workings of how this works. They have a whole community built up. It kind of looks like it's built on the bones of an old Wild West town almost, because it's kind of got that strip with the saloons in the main street and whatnot, and it's got storefronts and all that thing going on, and we get to see how all that works. There's almost no action in this entire episode. It's almost all dialogue driven. It's very contemporary. It's very down to earth, actually, and almost makes you forget that this entire thing is taking place in a post-apocalypse, because it's a very civilized area. There's a scene where they get to watch a movie. There's a scene where they have a heart-to-heart about going and getting their hair cut and going clothes shopping and things along those lines. Joel has just these very standard conversations about the past with Tommy and all that. However, this episode, I think, was the defining moment for Pedro Pascal, and his acting as Joel, because he has a scene in this where he has to basically let all of his emotions out, and it's something that you would never see Game Joel doing. It's completely out of character for Game Joel, but for show Joel, it is spot on and absolutely perfect. And again, just kind of highlights how these two products deviate from one another, how these two pieces of art are telling their stories in different ways. Because like I said, these characters are similar, but they are not the same. And this is done incredibly well. They do end up leaving in this episode, where they have to go all the way to... They're supposed to go to, I think in the game it was supposed to be a university, but in the show it's a hospital. And this is where the Fireflies are supposed to be, according to what Tommy told them. So they go to this hospital, quote unquote, or whatever, where they're supposed to go. They figure everything out after reconciling their differences between one another or whatever. And then, of course, the big accident happens where Joel gets knocked unconscious. Ellie has to save him. And this kind of sets up the later events that lead into the winter chapter of the game. Now, of course, the moments between this was the DLC known as Left Behind, and this ended up becoming the 7th episode of the show. Left Behind was what happened to Ellie that led up to the moments of her getting infected, and this involves her friend Riley, who basically sneaks her out of her is it like a school or something like that, like a dorm or whatever, sneaks her out in the middle of the night, takes her to this abandoned mall where they turn the lights on and have a big party together. This is basically Riley's going away present to Ellie before she runs off to go join the Fireflies. And it just sets up that entire situation. And Riley is played by Storm Reed, who is an actress I have seen in multiple other things, and she is slowly getting really big. Actually, she's been in a lot of things lately. There was one of those like mystery Facebook finding how my mom got kidnapped movie that like came out recently that apparently she was really good in, and like I feel like her star is rising a lot. And seeing her in this, I was like, oh yeah, I know her. She's really good. And they actually were fantastic, the acting individually from the two actors. However, I do have a little bit of a criticism with this episode, and it's more the first 2/3 of the episode rather than the last third. So the events of it are obviously, they go into the mall, they party for a while, they connect, they have their conversations, they do all sorts of things together, and then tragedy strikes, and of course they get infected. That's just a known fact about the DLC and how it all happens. I mean, Ellie basically tells part of the story very early on. In a general sense, none of this is really a secret. But the chemistry between Bella Ramsey and Storm Reed in this particular, and like in the first 2/3 of this episode, I didn't really feel it all that much. I felt like they were kind of just playing the part. I didn't feel like the characters really connected until the tragedy happens. And from that moment on, for the remainder of the episode, that acting is so captivating. It is so stellar. They are so in sync with one another. And just the remainder of the episode is just an emotional roller coaster. So well done. So well done. I think it's almost the exact same way I felt with the Left Behind DLC in general, where I was just kind of like, okay, yeah, we're meandering. I mean, this is cute and all, but really, are we going to get anywhere? And then the last third of it happens, and you're like, oh my gosh, wow, this was not at all the level of emotions I was expecting from something I literally knew was already going to happen. And the show, again, pulled that off phenomenally. Although I will say, of all of the episodes, maybe besides the first one, this is probably the one up to this point that is the closest one-to-one to what happens in the game. It doesn't deviate a lot, but I actually think that this was the strongest example of adapting moments from the game. In fact, just to kind of backtrack a little bit, there's a moment in, I can't remember if it was in the third episode at the tail end or if it was in the early parts of I think it was actually in the early part of the fourth episode. There's a very famous scene from the game where Ellie has stolen one of Bill's magazines. And if you don't know about Bill, Bill is gay. And that is only hinted at in the game, but it is very obvious in the show. And she has access to one of his big gay porno mags and is looking at it, and Jill is like, Ellie, put that thing away. What the heck are you doing? And Ellie kind of messes with him a little bit and goes like, oh, wow, the page is all sticky, and he's all grossed out by it. It's a great scene in the game. It's very comedic, it's very funny, and it's like one of the most legendary comedic cutscenes from the game. They actually adapted that scene one-to-one in the show, like not even deviating in the dialogue whatsoever. It was the exact same lines. This is one of the most stilted, flat scenes in the entire show, and I'm not even kidding when I say that. There's literally a scene immediately after the fact where they're in like a camp, they're out camping in the woods, that is completely original and is infinitely better than that scene. I don't know what it is, but it feels like the second they tried to directly adapt things, it falls flat. It just doesn't work. It doesn't have the same energy that it had in the games, but whenever they're doing something original or there's their own dialogue that is completely taken out of the games and is only a part of the show, they do a fantastic job with it. It's just when they do the one-to-one adaptations, they couldn't get it right. Left Behind was probably the one time where I felt like they really nailed that. They actually were able to more or less adapt exactly how it was done in the game and do a very good job of it. And again, it's not all exact. There are some deviations here and there. Left Behind, there's product placement because, Left Behind is based off of a fictional world. So there's like a lot of, fictional arcade cabinets and, stores and things along those lines within there. But in the show, they're using a real world mall. So you're seeing a lot of products you might actually recognize. I believe they play Mortal Kombat instead of the made up video game in the in the arcade in the game, and you see a lot more things that you would actually recognize, but they still kind of keep the theme of it, and they generally get most of the dialogue down to a T, which I thought was really good. Then we move on to the 8th episode, which was I don't even know how to put this. In parts, I really liked what they did, but in other parts, I really did not like this episode. So the winter segment of the game is, I think, one of the most horrific, darkest moments of the entire game. And I feel like a lot of people would agree with that. This is when Ellie is basically fending for herself because Joel is completely incapacitated after the injury that he sustained in episode 6. She takes him somewhere. She's hiding him in a house, trying to get medicine, and she comes across another settlement of people led by a man named David. In the games, he is played by Nolan North. And he is a total creep. But in the games, there is a slow setup to this because originally Ellie is hunting for a deer. She kills the deer, and then she comes across David and his partner, and they offer to bargain with her to take the deer because they have a lot more people to feed. And she, as a bargain's like, well, I'll give you the deer if you give me medicine, penicillin or whatever. And so the other guy runs off. David and Ellie are left alone, and while that scene is happening, infected attack. So then they have a big moment where they have to fend off and fight the infected together. It's almost a moment of like bonding and camaraderie where they actually help each other out, and he saves her a couple times and she saves him a couple times, and we could actually work together, until it turns out that David actually knows who they are because the people that he sent to the hospital to find some supplies were killed by this man and this girl. And suddenly Ellie realizes that David is not her friend. So she takes the medicine and runs. But then, of course, they follow behind and try to hunt her and Joel down, which, of course, leads to the conflict of the entire sequence of events. But in the show, it's a little bit different because we actually get to see more of this community that David's a part of. In the show, David's like a pastor, and he holds power over this entire community with religion, basically. And of course, you can immediately start to see where they're going to make parallels, and they're going to start to slide in some not so subtle messaging about how this man is holding a power over this community with fear and terror. And what I really liked, though, is that Troy Baker, the actor who obviously plays Joel in the games, plays David's sidekick in the show, which I thought that was really cool. And we also do get to see Ellie's actress in the show as well, but I'll talk about her in a minute. But we get to see him in there, and this portrayal of David is a little bit different because he almost instantly comes off as a total freaking creep. Like within the very first moment that you see him, because you actually get a little bit of a prelude scene with him before he meets Ellie. You get to see him with his congregation, with his people, and how much of a total psychopath he is right off of the bat. So none of that is really left up to our imagination because the episode doesn't really waste time. So right off the bat, Ellie has to worry about him. However, the overtones and the level to which David is a total psycho and creep is laid on a lot thicker in the show than it is in the game. The levels to which David is, the horrors to which David is capable of, slowly build over the course of this chapter in the game, which is, I think, part of why it was so effective. Like, you realize he's not a good guy pretty early on, but you don't realize just how horrific he is until the tail end of the chapter. Like, yeah, he's bad, and he doesn't like Ellie, but, later on you learn that he's leading a group of cannibals, which is obviously terrifying. But then even beyond that, you start to learn that he is, well, words I'm not going to say in an episode like this because I don't want to get demonetized. I mean, oof, yeah, he turns out to be just one of the most sicko, crazy monsters of all to ever exist. Like the most inconceivable just psychopath, the worst of the worst that humanity could ever be. In the show, this is, again, laid on incredibly thick right from the get-go. And he tries to justify things, but there's no connection there with which you can, I guess, even come to sort of empathize with him, or at least or at least maybe see the humanity in him before the really creepy stuff starts to unravel itself. No, you're kind of almost immediately like, okay, this guy sucks and is bad, and we need to get away from him, and Ellie needs to get away from him. Like, almost right off the bat. And I think that's my biggest issue with the way that this was all handled, was that I didn't like the way that this episode almost hurried to what it was trying to do, because you have to remember, this is like an entire chunk of the game, okay? I mean, Last of Us takes place over the course of, like, okay, so you got the opening scene, which isn't really a chapter, it's more of a prologue. You got the entire escaping the quarantine zone, which is, and then losing Tess, which, like, all of that's a chapter. The whole Bill saga is a chapter. The whole Chicago saga is a chapter. The whole Tommy and everything involving them is a chapter. And then there's the winter chapter, and then there's the finale chapter. So you've basically got 6 chapters over the course of The Last of Us, at least in regards to, I mean, there's technically more chapters, but in terms of, like, sections of the plot, okay? The winter chapter is an entire 1/6 of the game, and yet this is condensed into, I believe, the 2nd shortest episode in the entire series. So it just feels really rushed. And I think that's what it mostly boils down to. They're trying to still put all of the exact same character moments and elements that we get within that chapter in the game and condense it into an under 1 hour episode, which I think that was my biggest problem with it, is it just wasn't as effective because of that. It felt a little bit more rushed. Everyone felt a little bit more detached. Now, I do want to say, though, the actor that was playing David did a fantastic job with, given what he actually had to work with. But this episode, I think, suffered from being rushed more than any other, and I think as a result ended up being my 2nd least favorite episode in the entire show. More just because I expected more from it. Bella Ramsey, though, was the star of this episode. They did absolutely fantastic, wonderful, wonderful acting performance from them. And overall, just a little bit disappointing in that regard. Then we get the final episode, which is, I mean, I want to say it's my 2nd least favorite episode, but I don't know if I would go quite. I'd say this is my 3rd least favorite episode, because there are some aspects of this that are extremely strong. This is obviously the finale, okay? It's the finale. And there are a couple things that if you want to adapt this from the game, you have to get right. One thing I was absolutely unwilling to budge on, and it looked like the creators were too, was the final scene, the very final scene. They did it perfectly. That was fantastic. The opening of this episode is also fantastic. We get another flashback, this time seeing how Ellie was born. And we get to see Ellie's mother, who is played by, ironically enough, the actress who plays Ellie in the games. Now, what you probably didn't know is that the actress playing Ellie in the games is like was at the time like a 30-something-year-old woman. So, yeah, not young by any means, but she just had a voice that fit it very well. And, obviously now with the show, she is more than capable to play the part as, Ellie's mother for this. And I mean, it's kind of almost symbolic in that regard, because she is, the inception of Ellie as a character, so it's very fitting. And this is a very good, very harrowing flashback scene that kind of sees how Ellie's mother was actually friends with Marlene. And this connects a lot into some of the events that happen throughout, and we get to see how Marlene is connected to this entire thing, actually in a way that the game never does. So this is all extremely strong. We get a little bit more to sympathize with Marlene than we did in the games, and I really appreciated that. They took a lot more time to structure that. Then we obviously get the scene in Salt Lake City with Joel and Ellie. We get the giraffe scene and all of that sort of stuff, and them just having a conversation after the fact. These scenes also done incredibly well. The giraffe scene done superbly, although I do think that they missed an opportunity with the framing of the background in that. I think the framing in the game was a bit better than it was in the show. Come on, dang it, just include all that iconography. It would have been so much better, but I digress. Because I think it was just like in the background in the show, it was just like a baseball stadium or something like that, which that's not as exciting. I'm just going to say it right now. Not as exciting. But regardless, that one little nitpick aside, they then had a conversation after that where, they just kind of talk. And this happened in the games as well, although it was a bit of a different context. This was another extremely incredible scene. However, in the games, after this happens, they go into the tunnels. They have to fight through a bunch of infected. They start to go into deeper and deeper water. eventually big disaster happens, and they get rushed away into the flooded subway tunnel, and things just start to go haywire. They get knocked out, and then Joel wakes up in the hospital. All of that was cut out of the show. None of that's in there. In fact, while they're having their conversation, that's when they get ambushed by 2 fireflies and knocked out, and then they get taken in. Then we get the hospital scene, which is supposed to be obviously the big climax. This is the big fight where Joel basically learns what's going to happen to Ellie, and he snaps because he's not willing to lose another daughter again. And so he goes out on a rampage, and he basically takes out the fireflies, and we get the big climactic scene. This was the worst aspect of the show, in my opinion, because it is basically just given to us with, like, really emotional music, or what's supposed to be big emotional music playing over this, what's supposed to be a horrific scene of Joel just systematically gunning down everybody in the hospital. And while they get across the points they're supposed to, the impact falls completely flat, in my opinion, because of the framing of the situation. This is not supposed to be just like, I mean, it's almost played off as an inevitability, like you know what's going to happen here, which I think runs completely counter to the way that the story has been told up to this point. Because the show has been making these slight deviations, it has constantly made it so that your expectations are not exactly what I mean, like, if you've played the game, you don't know exactly how they're going to handle what comes up next. You know generally what's going to happen, but you don't know exactly how that's going to be framed. This whole final climactic fight scene or whatever at the end is very much framed like, okay, you knew this was going to happen. You know Joel's going to fight his way through everybody. And it's like, hold on a second. We know Joel's capable, but these are hardened soldiers, and he's all by himself, and we're supposed to just believe that he is just going to systematically kill every single one of them in just this foregone conclusion of a montage that happens at the end? I don't know about that one. I really don't know about that one, and I was not a big fan of the way that that was framed all the way up until he takes Ellie away and all that stuff. I felt like this was the part of the episode that really didn't work. And I was very bummed by that. It was, in fact, I felt like the whole rest of the episode just kind of failed up until the very end, which they did that scene the way it was supposed to be done, and I am okay with that. There should be no other alternate ending to the way that the show ends. That it should be the last line, period. I don't care what anybody says. That it needs to be credits roll after Ellie says that final line, and that's it. But that one thing aside, getting that right, I don't know, man. I was a little bit disappointed in how they handled that ending. And again, they just kind of, it felt like they just rushed to conclusion. Again, this was a short episode. I actually think this, the finale, was the shortest episode in the entire season, which just does not make any sense. You can't make the finale the shortest. If anything, it should be close to the longest. And it just felt like they were almost rushing towards the conclusion here. And I think that was my biggest complaint with the show was for the majority, especially the middle episodes, from episodes 3 to 6, it really felt like they had this vision and this understanding of how they wanted to do the show in a way that was different from the games. And a big part of that, okay, I think, is Craig Mazin. No offense to Neil Druckmann, because Neil Druckmann is very incredible with his writing. He is good, no matter how much everybody hates him and no matter how much disagrees with him. Don't get me wrong. I also am not a big fan of a lot of the things the guy has done, especially the virtues of which he espouses in certain places, like his what was it? His little moment back when The Last of Us 2 came out, and there was that one reviewer who dared to compare The Last of Us Part 2 to Schindler's List, and Neil Druckmann got offended when everybody laughed at that. Like, stuff like that, yeah, he rubs me the wrong way sometimes. But Craig Mazin, he is an incredible writer. I mean, I'm just going to say right now, Chernobyl is my favorite show of all time. It is just freaking amazing. So good. That guy's work is to be admired. When Craig Mazin is basically doing the adaptation work, I felt like that's when it was the strongest. And I don't want to get ahead of myself because he did also do episode 8 and 9, but it felt like, and I wonder if maybe this was the director of those 2 episodes, because episodes 8 and 9 were both directed by the same person, and not Craig Mazin, not Neil Druckmann. They were directed by, was it Ali Abbasi? And I'm not about to say that Ali Abbasi is a bad director or anything, but I'm wondering if that's why, because these 2 episodes felt like they were the most rushed, and maybe Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann had to write within the constraints of those episodes. The only 2 episodes that were also credited to Neil Druckmann were the first episode, which makes a lot of sense, and the 7th episode, Left Behind, which was, basically a direct adaptation 1-to-1 from what happened. All the rest of the episodes, 2 through 6, were written solely by Craig Mazin. And his ability to, I think, adapt what was happening or what was supposed to be happening in these episodes, I think was the star of the show. That's what really made these episodes work more than anything. I obviously don't want to give him too much credit because these things are complicated procedures and, making a TV show is a gigantic team effort, and there are so many things that go into the production of these sorts of things that just boiling it down to one person's writing and the way he adapted the screenplay is probably not the most intelligent comment to make. But it does seem like there's a pattern here. I sense a pattern with these, and I feel like his understanding of the story was really what made the show work more than anything else. And these last couple of episodes really fell flat, and then the first episode was just kind of not, I don't think, strong enough to really get me hooked. But everything in the middle was just so good, so good. Like I said, that stretch from episode 3, and even in hindsight, I don't know if I dislike episode 2 as much as I said. I kind of want to go back and watch that one now that I've, with hindsight, after seeing the rest of the show, to be absolutely sure that that's my least favorite episode, because I don't think that's fair. I actually do think the last 2 episodes were my least favorite looking back, but I obviously don't want to immediately jump to that. I know, though, that episodes 3 through 6, 3, 4, 5, and 6 were stellar, and honestly 7 belongs right in there with them as well. That little stretch was just some fantastic television showmanship from the whole crew. Everyone did a fantastic job. The acting was super great. The show isn't perfect by any means, but if you're going to do an adaptation of a video game, this is how you do it. And that is kind of the whole point of everything I wanted to talk about here. The Last of Us Season 1 gets it right. Oh my goodness, does it ever get it right? It's not perfect. There are definitely a couple of things I disagreed with here and there, but man, when it hits, it freaking hits. This is a very good show. I cannot recommend it enough to anybody who's a fan of The Last of Us and its themes. If I were to rate it, I would give it like a solid 8 out of 10 overall, which is really, really solid, really strong. And personally, I think that this is the standard now that I think video game products need to be holding themselves up to. I'm not saying that everything needs to be this good, but at least within the ballpark. Otherwise, I feel like I feel like video games adaptations can't get away with it anymore. There's no more excuses now, and I guess is what I'm trying to say now that this show is out, because this proved that you can do it right. This proved that you can directly adapt it and it will work out well. Because technically, as far as pretty much every video game adaptation is concerned, this is the most one-to-one to the actual story of the games. Not the Uncharted movies, not any of the horrible Uwe Boll movies, not any of those things are as one-to-one. Maybe Tomb Raider is like the closest. The Alicia Vikander Tomb Raider is like the closest to the actual plot of the games. But even that takes so many liberties compared to this. This is the closest, and it's the best, which I feel like sets a very good example for a lot of people. I also love how the Halo showrunners got really offended by like how well this show did. Not in a PlayStation versus Xbox sense, mind you. That's not what I mean by that. I more so mean the Halo show was a horrific disappointment for everybody involved, and the showrunners should be ashamed of themselves for not doing a good job with that when the Halo source material is super strong. How dare you? Those showrunners were super offended when The Last of Us show came out, and everyone basically folded their arms and looked at him and said, "See, guys, this is how you do it." And it's like, y'all don't deserve to be, or you don't have the right to be offended anymore, because, yep, I'm sorry, but The Last of Us show showed how to do it right. And this is what I am expecting from future products. This is what I am expecting when I see something like the Fallout show. Y'all got no excuses anymore. But with all that said, guys, I know this was a long one. That was an entire TV show to get through, so obviously it took a lot of time. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this episode very, very much. Next month, I don't really think I'm going to have anything to talk about in this regard. Like no shows or movies to go over, so it probably won't be as long that time. I'll probably just fit a different topic of discussion in there, and maybe we can keep it at under an hour that time. So, with all that said, thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.